I don't talk about this often, because honestly, I still don't know how to explain it. But every now and then, when I wake up in the middle of the night, I still expect to see it. This happened when I was in college. I had just moved into a tiny rental house. It was old and creaky, but cheap. It was just me and my roommate, Sarah, and we were thrilled to finally have our own space. At first, it was just little things. Footsteps when no one else was home. Doors that would be open when I was sure I had closed them. But we always laughed it off. We just figured it was an old house, right? But then I started waking up at exactly 3:12 a.m. every single night. At first, I didn't think much of it. I'd roll over, check my phone, and then go back to sleep. But then one night, I woke up and felt almost in a panic, because it felt like someone was in the room with me. I didn't hear anything, and I didn't see anything. But I knew, in that deep, primal way, you just know when you're being watched. And then the room got ice cold. I turned my head, barely able to breathe, and that's when I saw it. A tall, shadowy figure was standing in the corner of my room. It wasn't moving, it was just standing there. It looked like a man, but it clearly wasn't human. My heart was pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. I wanted to scream, but I couldn't. My body wouldn't move. I just stared, frozen, as this thing stood in my room, just watching me. And then, as if someone flipped a switch, my body just unlocked. I was able to lunge for the lamp, turning it on, but the corner was empty. I barely slept for the rest of the night, and in the morning I had convinced myself it was just a dream, or even sleep paralysis maybe. But then Sarah asked me something that made my stomach drop. She came into the kitchen as I was eating breakfast, and asked if I had come into her room last night. I just stared at her and said no, why? She looked really shaken up and said that she'd woken up in the middle of the night, and she thought she saw someone standing in her doorway. But when she blinked, they were gone. We never talked about it again, and a few months later we moved out. In midsummer 2004, I was living in Okinawa, Japan with my wife, who was from there. During the Japanese high school graduation season, my mother-in-law's florist shop was overwhelmed with orders for flower arrangements and bouquets. She asked my wife to help out one evening, working late to prepare arrangements for the next morning's customers. At the time, my wife was about 5 or 6 months pregnant with our second child. We were going through a rough patch financially and had been staying at my mother-in-law's house for a few months while we got back on our feet. She graciously took us in when we had nowhere else to go. On this particular night, I was falling asleep on the living room sofa while my 2-year-old son slept on the floor beside me. I'm not sure how long I'd been asleep when suddenly I was woke up with sleep paralysis. If you've ever experienced it, you know how terrifying it can be. I felt an overwhelming sense of dread, like something was lurking to my left near the closet area. I know it sounds cliché for a Japanese house to have a haunted closet, but that's exactly what I felt. After what seemed like an eternity, I was finally able to breathe again and move. I rolled off the sofa and laid down on the floor next to my son. When my wife and mother-in-law returned home around 3 a.m., I didn't tell them what happened. The following night, everyone was home, and we had gone to bed as usual. Around 2 a.m., my wife's blood-curdling screams woke us all up. We rushed in and turned on the lights, and found her sitting upright on her futon, trembling. She told us she had been awakened by pressure on her feet. When she looked down, she saw a woman with long white hair slowly sliding her hands up her legs, moving towards her. That's when I told them about my experience the night before. Then my mother-in-law dropped her own bombshell. The night before my incident, she too had woken up with sleep paralysis. We were all thoroughly freaked out. About a month later, I'd finally landed a decent job, and we'd almost had enough money saved for our own apartment. We were having a small celebration at my mother-in-law's place with close family, when her uncle, who was sitting next to me, asked, "Are you almost ready to move? You need to get out of here as soon as you can." I froze dead right there. I asked him if there was something here, and he said yes. I asked him if it was in the corner or the closet. He said it is, and it's here now. We moved out that weekend. I was on a business trip in the Northeast last year. There was a mix-up with hotels, so I ended up staying at one of those old historic hotels. You know, the kind with ornate moldings and slightly uneven floors, so you know the place was built long before modern construction standards. I ended up checking in late, around 11 p.m. after a delayed flight and a sketchy cab ride through downpouring rain. The front desk clerk seemed distracted, barely making eye contact as he handed me the key to room 412, and said, "We've upgraded you," in a very annoyed tone. "Top floor, corner room, best view in the house." I should have been grateful, but I just grabbed the keys and left. I was exhausted and just wanted to shower and go to sleep. The elevator was very old, probably original to the hotel. It groaned and shuddered its way up to the 4th floor. And of course room 412 was all the way at the very end of the hallway. The room itself was surprisingly spacious. It had a bunch of antique furniture, and somewhat reminded me of something you would see in a movie. But I was exhausted, so I took a quick shower and hopped into bed. and that's when I first noticed the cold spot. It was just a small area near the head of the bed, kind of between the headboard and the nightstand. It was cold, and I mean, like, noticeably cold, in just this one basketball-sized area. I just blamed it on the building being old, and pulled the covers up closer to my face and passed out. I woke up around 3 a.m. to the sound of water running. Groggy and disoriented, I figured I must have left the bathroom faucet dripping. I stumbled out of bed and pushed the bathroom door open. The faucet was off, but the mirror was completely fogged up, as if someone had just taken a steaming hot shower. I just stared at it, very confused. Like, why is the mirror fogged up if the whole room was now freezing? I backed out of the bathroom and tried to convince myself it was just condensation from the dramatic temperature changes in the room. I went back to bed but couldn't fall asleep. That's when I heard the footsteps, quickly crossing from the door to the window, and then back again, like a kid was running back and forth. I laid perfectly still, eyes wide open in the darkness, watching for any movement, but I couldn't see anything. I reached over and turned on the bedside lamp, and right when the light came on, the footsteps stopped abruptly. I spent the rest of the night with all the lights on, huddled under the blankets. When morning finally came, I packed my things and practically ran to the lobby. A different clerk was at the front desk, an older woman. I told her I needed to switch rooms. I was supposed to be there for another 3 nights. So I told her there was something wrong with the heat in room 412 and I couldn't sleep, which was partially true, but I couldn't bring myself to tell her what actually happened. I switched to a room on the 2nd floor for the remainder of my stay, and never heard or saw anything else. My family, my husband, our son, and I, were driving home from Niagara Falls to Guelph, Ontario. I was behind the wheel. It was sometime between 1 and 2 a.m., and as we exited the freeway onto one of the main highways, the area became noticeably darker. There were fewer streetlights, barely any cars, and a low fog creeping across the road. As we drove along this empty stretch, something on the right side of the road caught our attention. There was no sidewalk there, just open shoulder, and that's where we saw her. A girl, pale gray skin, long black hair that hung in her face. Her lips were bright red and smeared with lipstick, or blood. Her mouth was stretched back unnaturally far, like it had been forced open, and her clothes were torn and dirty. She was walking toward us on the opposite side of the road, so we passed her quickly. I didn't get a good look at her face, but something about her was completely wrong. My heart was racing. I glanced at my husband and asked, "Did you see that?" He nodded and said, "Yeah, I saw her." Part of me wanted to turn around. Maybe she had been in an accident, or maybe she needed help. But the fear hit us both at the same time. What if she wasn't alive? What if she followed us back to the car? So I kept driving. Not far from where we saw her, we noticed something else. There were 4 or 5 white crosses lined up along the side of the road. A memorial. I think there had been a fatal crash there in the past. To this day, I still wonder if she was part of that story. I never believed in ghosts. Not really. I mean, I loved a good scary story, but they were just stories, fun to tell in the dark and nothing more. That was until I moved into an old rental house a few years ago. It wasn't anything fancy, just an old 2-story home on the outskirts of town, the kind of place that felt heavy, like it had been lived in for too long. The landlord warned me that it had some quirks. I figured he meant creaky floors and bad plumbing, but after my first night, I realized that wasn't what he meant at all. It started with the door at the end of the hallway. There were 3 bedrooms upstairs. Mine, a spare bedroom, and one at the very end of the hall that I used for storage. The first time I noticed something was off, I had just gone to bed. I closed all the doors before laying down. But in the middle of the night I heard it, the slow, dragging creak of a door opening. I sat up, my heart hammering. The house was dark except for a sliver of dim light from the hallway. And that's when I saw it. The door at the end of the hall was open. I told myself I must have left it that way, or maybe a draft pushed it open. But when I got up to close it, I felt resistance, like someone was holding it from the other side. The next few nights it got worse. I'd wake up to faint tapping sounds, always from that room. And then one night I heard something even stranger, a whisper, faint like a breath right next to my ear, that says, "Come in." I nearly jumped out of my skin, and my entire body went cold. I grabbed my phone and turned on the flashlight, scanning the room. Nothing. But when I turned towards the hallway, my stomach dropped. The door at the end of the hall was open. I swear I locked that door, but there it is, open just a crack. My chest tightened, and every instinct screamed, "Don't go in there." I was shaking, but I reached for the knob anyway. I don't know what I expected to see. A person, a shadow, a trick of the light. But when I pushed the door open, the room was empty, except for one thing. Right in the center of the floor, almost like someone had carefully placed it there, was a single dusty footprint. Not mine. I broke the lease and moved out 2 weeks later. I didn't want to find out whose footprint that was. The landlord didn't even put up a fight. I'm guessing he knew why I was leaving. Thank you so much to everyone who submitted a story. I love making these videos and want to continue. If you have a story you want to share, I'd love to hear it. and I'd love to share it with everyone.